Nazrul. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh. Good morning to and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the conversation with the Prime Minister, Legacies in Transition, Reinvent or Retained. Firstly, too, on behalf of Bank Rakyat, allow me to thank you for making time for us today. It truly is an honor for us, and it is an immense boost of motivation for the staff and stakeholders of this bank. I will take less than 5 minutes to do a brief introduction on the topic. We will then show a short 1-minute video to encapsulate the session, which we will be doing for all of our sessions today. The crowd is here to listen to you, and I will make myself scarce and brief. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, legacies means different things to different people. In essence, it is a word that simply asks this of us all. In the final analysis, what would we like to be remembered for by those who may just remember us someday? We are not here today to reflect on personal legacies, rather the lasting legacy of this country, Malaysia, and the business environment that continues to keep it relevant. 62 years and counting, this country has evolved from once a predominantly agricultural backwaters to amongst the 20 most competitive nations for ease of doing business by World Bank and World Economic Forum in the last 5 years alone. But the question that battles the souls of many corporate people who continue to want to build this nation, even post our retirement ages, is that, one, what exactly do we leave for the next generation? And two, will what we leave for the next generation be based on legacies built from years back or legacies reinvented? It is in this context, too, that in Malaysia, we question the applicability and relevance of our business models. Should we continue adopting and aligning with this legacy and or perhaps try other models of mixed, vibrant, or hybrid public and private sectors? I presume in the early decades after independence, a form of public governance that was dominant is inevitable or rather necessary. In fact, during your first tenure as Prime Minister then, you moved Malaysia fast on an economic and industrial development. In today's climate of social media, 24/7 netizen and news reporting, can this model be retained or must it be reinvented? Global models, once seemed indomitable, is today fragile. This not only extends to politics and public policies, but also to market systems, regulatory environment, and corporate models, and also customer profiling. It covers the role of public sector and the models of private sector. It questions the very notion of shareholder value system and asks, why not stakeholder value system? It is pushing us to question political interference in private sector, the lobbying culture of the private sector, and the governance of it all. We had this debated too in our first panel earlier this morning. This essentially encapsulates the purpose of this forum. We at Bank Rakyat do not have all the answers. And so we wanted top brains of people who themselves grapple with these similar questions to share with us their vision and thoughts, not least their frustrations of maintaining legacies that may no longer be relevant. When you took office in 2018, you said, and I quote, from one of your early international interviews, the new Malaysia, of course, is something that should be certainly better than the last regime, and even an improvement on the period during which I was Prime Minister for 22 years. which means, of course, that we have to go back to democracy and the rule of law. 5th July 2018, in West Point interview. We have seen many new Malaysias, yet some of the old continues in some parts of our daily life. To what extent must new exert itself, and where must the old remain? It is a question we grapple with every day as a society through every new issue we face. In your own words, Tun, you said GLCs have become monsters, deviating from the original noble intentions of helping the poor. Since assuming the premiership, you have literally scaled down Khazanah's holdings, for instance, and realigned it to its original focus. In a broader context, you are scaling down government's role in business to ensure international investors know we are serious about strengthening governance. Government-linked companies today are largely free of politicians taking board roles as the government promised. The government kept its words and translated this into the National Anti-Corruption Plan under the National Centre of Governance, Integrity and Anti-Corruption under its Strategic Trust 6, which covers corporate governance. Here is a legacy. You started, but you came back and boldly and started reinventing the structure of government that has failed us, where most leaders would have liked to have retained. And ladies and gentlemen, this is a cue for us in GLCs to reflect on. On that note, Yang Amat Berhormat Tun, I would like to end with one quote of our first Prime Minister, Yang Amat Berhormat Tunku Abdul Rahman Putra, which states out for me on value system, which we need to rethink as a society. And I quote, "If you think you are rich, there are many richer than you. If you think you are clever, there are more people cleverer than you. But if you think you're honest, then you are among the few, and in this instance, it is best to be among few." Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. So the words of Tunku is a timeless legacy and what integrity is all about. On that note, Tun, ladies and gentlemen, let's watch this video before we hear from our Prime Minister.
Legacies in transition.
Majority of the people must know what is good for themselves. I beg to differ. I was not a dictator, but that doesn't make anybody change their mind.
Reinvent or retain?
Too many people have got ideas which they think should be carried out by the government.
It is very important that youth who will inherit the future realize that if they are able to retain their ideals and values, there is then much hope. In order to grow a country, to develop a country, the first need is for stability. Our nation is blessed with a responsible and conscientious citizenry.
Ladies and gentlemen, Yang Amat Berhormat Tun, welcome again to the topic of our conversation today, legacies in transition, reinvent or retain. Can we proceed, Tun? How has, I want to talk about your 18 months on. So how has the first 18 months as a Prime Minister, after a long retirement, how has been your main challenges this time around as Prime Minister? Maybe how is it being a Prime Minister in today's environment? How is it different to your first tenure in the 1990s?
Well, thank you very much. This is a very
important question because there were great expectations when the former opposition became the government. But I am still the same person who became Prime Minister under the previous regime. But I find the experience extremely different. When I became Prime Minister in 81, everything was in place. All I need to do was to sit down and understand what's going on, decide what to do, and implement projects that will contribute towards the development of Malaysia. This time around, I came in to find an administrative machinery that has been uh, destroyed almost. There is no longer the kind of smooth functioning of the administrative machinery. The machinery has got to be cleaned up. Then, of course, there is a question of finance. The previous government borrowed huge sums of money, and we have to pay. Whether we like it or not, we have to pay that money, and that means that much of the money that we collect by the government goes towards paying debts. So there is less fund for development, even for administration. Then, of course, there is this great expectation among the people who had become used to getting free money. Although they didn't like the previous government, but they liked the free money. And they would like to see that free money still coming to them. This we cannot deliver because that free money came through illegal means. Money was stolen perhaps and misappropriated, and that money was used to actually bribe the people. Now we cannot do that simply because we don't have the money, even if we are inclined to do so. Then, of course, there is the whole change in the attitude of the people. Malaysia today is a much bigger country than what it was in 1981. And big countries mean big problem. Just imagine waste. One person producing some waste is okay. 1,000 is still okay. 1,000,000 still okay. But when you have the numbers multiplied by 32, we have 32 million people, the amount of waste they throw up is difficult to handle. And this is becoming a worldwide problem. How to get rid of waste. So there are many, many problems that I had to tackle this time around. And it's not been easy. Of course, lots of people take pot shots at the government, at me particularly, because I'm supposed to be in charge. But this time around, I must admit, I had to work much harder than when I worked in 1981. And also, I'm a little bit older than when I was in 81. So the strength was greater in 81 than in 2018. So tackling problems becomes a major problem that prevents us from looking into how we can develop the country, even if we have ideas.
Thank you, Tun. When you talk about waste, Bank Rakyat has actually decided to champion the bank as the sustainable bank. And that is why there is no plastic in this room today. It's a zero plastic ambience. The video just now, Tun, we saw you talk about New Malaysia. You began this journey with a vision of New Malaysia. And since much has been said about the whole notion of New Malaysia, some good, some, as you would have yourself heard, quite critical, Is New Malaysia here to reinvent? Perhaps too, you probably can explain to us what you mean by New Malaysia, and then share with us what is your vision for New Malaysia in regards to government institutions and government-linked businesses and the private sector.
Well, the environment has changed tremendously. In the first place, we are more populous. We have more people in the country, so we need more money. But on the other hand, it's not easy to get money now because we have to spend money on other things like paying debts. But the new Malaysia will really be a Malaysia that is, in the first place, well governed, meaning to say that everybody does the job that he is asked to do and to do it properly. But having figured out what a government, just a government must do is one thing, but responding to the environment is another thing. Obviously, many things have changed. Today, we have all these new technologies coming in, which affect the way we do things. And if we don't learn and apply these new technologies, we will be left behind. We will not make progress. So a lot of time is spent in trying to understand the environment, the new technologies, digitalization, artificial intelligence, for example. A lot of time has to be learned how to apply these new ways of doing things. If we know that, then we can apply to the way we run this country. And the way we run this country is, of course, to grow this country and to be competitive in a changing world. It's not the same as the previous time. The previous requirement was to change from an agro-based country into an industrialized country. That has been done in many places. But today, what we are doing is entirely new, not only for Malaysia, but also for other countries. As they change, we have to change. If we don't change, then of course we will be left behind. This is the task that is faced by this government in trying to create a new Malaysia that is based on intelligence, not just working hard, but intelligence. You have to use the powers that are available now in a very intelligent way. What before was not done, today can be done. Today we are connected. Data is everywhere, and we collect data in order to understand our surroundings, and we have to plan how to make use of data. For example, nowadays there is facial recognition, but it's not just facial recognition. The moment you recognize a person, somebody somewhere has already collected data about him. If you access the data, then you will know more about the person. Not just that he is passing through the turnstile, but that he has a record that is good or bad, and we have to plan what to do based on the records, huge amounts of data about this one person. But of course, we don't deal with one person. At KLIA, for example, they deal with 42 million passengers a year, and that's a lot of data to be collected, to be analyzed, understood, and applied. So this new Malaysia is a Malaysia that must be modernized in the sense of doing things based on more intelligence, more data, more analysis. That is the new Malaysia.
Very interesting, Tun. Thank you. So if we are talking about digitalization, artificial intelligence, and we should be basing our leadership on intelligence and modernization, how would you rate the quality of leaders here in Malaysia now? Are they ready? And if they are not, where must the improvement be focused on?
Well, for 15 years I was out of the government. I must admit that I was out of touch with governance, with the use of data, with the new methods of doing things. It's not like the old way, the old ways. Now we are connected. Connected means that you have access to a lot more information than was possible before. Now, this information will influence the way you think, the way you act. And this is something that you have to learn, not only the mechanics of the thing, but the new availability of information. Of course, I have a new government, people who for 60 years were outside the government. When you are in the opposition, it was easy. All you have to do is to criticize the government. But now that you are in the government, you have to be doing things. And when you do things, you expose yourself to criticism. So the new members of the government have a short time to learn how to do things in the government and how to do things using the new technologies which influence the decision making and the speed of implementation. Thank you.
Very interesting. Thank you, Tun. If we can change the gear a little bit. Tun, the first panel just now discussed legacies built for government in business and also government and business. But what the audience here would want to hear from you, because you are seen to be instrumental in setting up Malaysia Incorporated, which was primarily focused on nation building and development of society. So 3 decades now, Tun, and moving on, the question is, have we achieved that vision intended for them? How have the GLCs and GLCs and statutory bodies enacted to do this business, have they met that original vision?
Generally speaking, I think government should not be in business. We are not very good at it. The private sector should be doing the business. The business people should be doing the business. But sometimes it's necessary for the government to do some kind of business. For example, when we created Khazanah, the reason was very simple. We wanted to allocate shares to a lot of people, and the Bhumi Putras, for example, are incapable of taking up the shares. If they do take up the shares, they would immediately sell the shares for immediate profit. As a result, their share of the wealth of this country remains static or even decreasing. In order to keep the shares still available to Bhumi Putras, we created an organization that will buy up the shares that are not taken up by the Bhumi Putras. That was the initial purpose of setting up Khazanah. But then, of course, once you have Khazanah, Khazanah sees opportunities. And so it began to go into business by itself, not only taking shares that are not taken up by Bhumi Putras, but they went into business and they compete with the Bhumi Putras. And of course, this is hard for the Bhumi Putras. Already they are new, they are inexperienced, but now they have to contest against a government agency. But over time, we find that the government agency has grown and become very powerful, taking up the shares and, of course, being financed partly by the government. And it became a huge monster that swallows up everything, leaving very little to the Bhumiputras. Even when we have Bhumiputras who are capable, they are not likely to get these businesses because Khazanah feels that it must retain the business so as to grow itself. So you create a business agency in government for one reason, but
even after some time, it begins to become um, an entity on its own, and it does no longer, it doesn't follow any longer the purpose for which it was built. This is the problem that we face when we have government going into business, making use of its power in the government to make the business a success. And this means that the private sector cannot compete, but the private sector normally is much more efficient. One experience I had was with Felda, for example. We created Felda to give uh, some access to land to the landless. We grow palm oil or rubber, but after we began to operate Felda, every year Felda is given allocation from government funds. And yet in the private sector, all the big assets were making money. They were not asking government for funds. How is it that the people running Felda needs to be well, financed by the government, while the private sector is able to thrive on the basis of the profits they make? So we stopped that. We stopped Felda from getting any more funds, and unfortunately, it made good progress initially, but later on, of course, lots of bad things and nasty things happened, and now they are in trouble. But as you know, at this moment, the, while Felda is in trouble, the big estates, despite the fall in the price of palm oil, is still able to survive and even to make money. That is why I believe that it is the private sector which should be doing business, because they know business. Government does not know business.
Thank you very much, Tun. You started answering this question by saying that you think government shouldn't be involved in business. So does the government foresee reducing stakes then in businesses that it may still hold a large shareholding on some of these? Do you think there will be more involvement of the government or less involvement from standpoint of shareholding? I mean, we mentioned Felta, and we have Mara, we have Kazana, we have Tabung Haji. So do you think there will be more involvement or less by the government here?
We have in this country a problem of trying to make everybody gain on the benefits of the, that accrues from this rich country. Unfortunately, in order to enrich yourself, you have to know how to do business. You have to know how to manage money. But some people are not able to do that. They cannot compete. They keep on being left far behind. Over time, the distant disparity between rich and poor, between urban and rural, will become more extreme. And we know that when there is disparity between rich and poor, it leads to confrontation. Even if it is single ethnic, one of the reasons for communism and socialism was because the capitalists were making a lot of money, the workers were not making money, and so there was a confrontation, there was a revolution, and of course they begin to impose socialistic or communistic ideas on the country, and in the end the country's growth becomes stunted. This will happen in this country if we allow disparities to be extreme, as between race and race, as between urban and rural, as between state and state, etc. We must reduce the disparity so that it is just acceptable. Then you will avoid confrontation, you will have stability, and the country can grow. That is why even today we are concerned about the disparities this new wawasan kemakmuran bersama is directed towards reducing disparities between rich and poor. It so happens that rich and poor is also related to different races and different the town and the rural areas. This government is wanting, is willing, is bent on trying to enrich the rural areas so that rural people are not so far behind compared to urban people. So that is the objective of this government.
Thank you very much, Tun. You started that question by saying that people must know how to manage money. Here is a question that I am sure foreign investors would be very interested to hear your answer. And I was told there are about 40 to 50 equity analysts and bond analysts in this room. The perception remains that it is who you know rather than what you know to get appointed. In the National Anti-Corruption Plan, one of the targets is to have a transparent process of selection. Is this in place now, Tun? If so, would you be able to share with us the vision of the government for how it selects leaders to head its entities?
Well, I had the opportunity to visit many countries in the world. I've seen some countries doing well. I've seen some countries which are unable even to be governed. So there must be something that is different between those who succeed and those who have failed. And I assume that it is due to their character, the value system that they believe in and they practice. If the value system is wrong, you cannot possibly succeed. For example, if you don't work, how do you figure out on making money? If you don't work, you must work. You must give something in order to get something. But in some countries, they thought that if the government can give money to them, then you don't have really to work. And this was the idea that brought on socialism and communism. The government will take over the businesses, the government will make the money, and the money will be given to the people. Suddenly they found that when they take over the businesses, the rich people, the clever people who made a lot of money disappeared, or some of them were actually killed. Who is going to pay the tax to support the government? They suddenly realized that what they have are only poor people, workers who are paid low pays. If they have to contribute to the government coffers, obviously they are going to get poorer. But where do you get the money? You can't just mint money. You have to produce something, to sell something in order to make money, and the government then can collect taxes from the profits that you make. That is a source of funds for the government. But if nobody is coming up with ideas about how to make more money, you only have workers. Who is going to introduce new ideas, new businesses and all that? Because the government is not quite capable of doing that, because without the taxes that they levy on the rich, the government too will become poor. And so we see the regression of the socialistic and the communistic countries and the development, fast development of the capitalistic system. Not that capitalism is the best form of government, but certain aspects of capitalism contribute towards the betterment of society because they create wealth, they create jobs, for example. And of course, without them, the government itself cannot be creating wealth and jobs. And this will result in a regression of the country. Knowing all that, we have to be very careful about how we treat while the rich, well, we want to see people becoming rich so that they can create jobs and they can create a good market. We also want them to share the wealth with the people who also contribute towards wealth, creation of wealth. But when you say share the, the, the work, it means even workers have to work, contribute something in order to gain something. But when you have people who are disinclined to work, I don't see how they can ever make money. They cannot depend upon the government because the government too will be short of funds to support a population that is not creating wealth through their contribution by way of work for themselves, which eventually enrich the country as well.
Thank you very much, Tun. I was very fascinated when you used the word value system, which we know that is also your pet subject close to your heart. Shall we then now talk about value system, leadership styles, whether remnants of the past legacies should stay? Malaysia is often ranked to have the highest protocol to its leaders based on the Hofstede ranking, which is often attributed to us not being able to correct our leaders and being a yes person or a yes man to our leaders. So would you agree that this culture still is prevalent today in Malaysia? And what must leaders in the public and private sector do better to improve our value system to ensure the companies that we are leading possess value system like Japan, which you often talk about, Tun? We know Japan is very close to your heart, looking east.
Well, I would like to say that Malaysia is very feudalistic. We show great respect for your boss and for whoever is above you in rank, to the point where we find them making a lot of mistakes which are detrimental to them, but we do not correct them. And in the end, of course, they will destroy themselves because they are not told that what they are doing is wrong. This feudalism is not bad, but when you go to extremes, then you don't correct the leaders, they are bound to go wrong. The problem with dictatorship is that eventually the dictator who is great power and can actually develop his country will do things which are wrong. He will not be corrected, and of course there will be an uprising and attempts to overthrow him. This is a problem that we face with autocracy. On the other hand, the idea of democracy involves being able to be free, being free to criticize the top man and even to displace him, to overthrow him through the simple process of just voting. You don't have to have a revolution or wars, fratricidal wars and the like. Just by voting, you can bring him down. So, democracy enables people to voice their thoughts much better than in autocratic nations. So, we, although we are democratic, but essentially our value system places a very high value for being very obedient. The civil servants used to say, your obedient servant. And of course, sometimes when they are asked to do wrong things, they also will carry out because they are obedient. You have to find a situation where somebody will want to say, no, I'm not going to do this because this is wrong. It took the country 15 years before they came around to telling the government that it is wrong and you have to go. And they voted the government out. But it should not be 15 years. Very much earlier, we have recognized the wrong things being done. And if the people are free to criticize, then I think the government would either correct itself or it will give in to other groups to form the government of the country.
Thank you, Tun. That answer is very important for institutions like us as it impacts our corporate culture, because you talk about leadership protocol and value system, and you also share with us the roadblocks. I would like to touch on what you said yesterday, Tun. Yesterday, you said no one is above the law, not even me. You were saying this in relevance to the party that was happening. So from standpoint of governance, Yang Amat Berhormat Tun, so you have spoken a lot about strengthening the governance, integrity, ethics in institutions and also in society. In fact, the GIACC that was led by Tan Sri Abu Qasim was your first initiative when you became the Prime Minister again in 2018. So, Tun, what are the plans of the government in strengthening ethics, integrity, and governance, but in this case, in regulatory bodies and oversight bodies?
Well, as you know, values play a big role in determining whether you are going to be successful or you're going to fail. This I noticed during my visits to many countries. Some countries, because they are hardworking, relatively honest, they made progress. But some countries are completely incapable of making any progress. And I noticed that it is because their value systems are different. So in order to ensure that the value systems are the right system, one of the things we must make certain of is to reduce the corruption that is often practiced by anybody who has any power. Because, as they say, power corrupts. Even the voter in the village has learned that he has power. He keeps on threatening the representative. If you don't do this for me, I will not vote for you. That is a threat. So anybody with power will can abuse power and can become corrupt. So much so that the right things cannot be done because of this corruption. I remember a case when I was still in Alosta where there was a magistrate friend of mine. He used to go to Penang every weekend with his, uh, they call in those days orderly or office boy. The office boy makes money by arranging whether anybody who wants to see the magistrate can see him or not. So he collects money. Uh, at the end of the week, both the magistrate and the office boy goes to Penang and has a good time on the money that was collected. And of course, because of that, things are not done properly. Things are done because some will have access, some will not have access. And the right things are not being done because it is not the right things which are given due consideration, is the money that you get. And when a country becomes very, very corrupt, nothing can be done properly. Everything will cost more, everything will not be done the way it should be done because you are influenced by the corrupt
by the money that you receive. That is why corruption must be eradicated if we are going to go anywhere at all. But of course, lots of people say, well, when you were Prime Minister, you were also corrupt. Uh, well, that is the accusation level at me. But what is the proof? Do I have buy diamonds of at $27 million or to give to my wife? I didn't. In fact, we live in a very ordinary life. Even my house is not something very grand. But still, you are accused of corruption. But we have to accept it, that accusations will come. What is important is that you don't get corrupted by the power that you will. But after I stepped down, things change, and people give priority to their families, to their son-in-laws, and eventually, of course, they took the money for themselves. And this caused the country to regress, unable to progress because people do not believe in you. People feel that doing business with this country would cost more money because part of the money goes towards bribing. That is why the first thing that needs to be done when this new government takes over is to try and eradicate corruption. I believe that it is impossible to completely eradicate corruption, but at least at the high level, we don't see corruption today, unless, of course, you think I'm corrupt, but that you are, you are entitled to think. But what is the evidence of corruption that you see in this government today? And I think it is part of the acceptance of this government, because this government has been accepted, uh, is because it is very much against corruption. On other things, of course, being inexperienced, it takes us a little bit more time to do. But the eradication of corruption has been given priority by this government, and as I said, that no one is above the law. Even if there are evidence that the Prime Minister is corrupt, action must be taken. People must be free to discuss, to talk, to accuse, because there are evidence. But of course, sometimes the people also make full use of freedom of the press to create fake information. And that we have to deal with. There is no way we can escape this new environment in which censorship becomes almost impossible. People are free to say what they like. Sometimes they say the right things, but at other times they vent their spite on somebody and make wrong accusation. We have to handle that because that is the environment that we now live in, where people are free, where access to media is open to everyone with no restriction, no censorship being possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tun. You started using the word power corrupts. And you also explained to us that it has caused regression to the country. But it's also interesting that you talk about people do have wrong accusation. We call it surat layang, Tun. But having said that, how much more can we improve from the work that you are already doing on the part of governance we discussed just now? You mentioned about international just now. So for what we are doing, so what are the steps to bring our institution to global standards? And how can Malaysia be a role model to its peers in the regional market and also globally?
Well, it is again
the value system. If you have a good value system, you're bound to succeed. What I noticed was that in 1961, I went to Japan. This was not long after the war. Japan was still rebuilding itself, but they were working very hard. If you read Akio Morita, the founder of Sony, he tells you that in early stages, the Japanese worker was willing to work for a bowl of rice with some soy sauce. They knew the bosses cannot pay, so they didn't demand, and they worked very hard. As a result, Japan recovered very quickly compared to many other countries, which if they have gone through a disaster or war, they cannot recover as quickly as Japan did. As you know, Japan, a defeated country, the only country ever bombed by nuclear bombs, recovered to the extent that it became the number two biggest economy in the world. That is based on the character, the value system of the people. That is why we thought we should look east. We look west, of course we follow west, but west have abused a lot of the freedom that they have. For example, the workers become so powerful that they demand for higher pay and less work. But in the East, we have workers who are willing to be paid with a bowl of rice. And because of that, the country develops because the production cost is low and they were able to compete in the world market. Of course, later on, the, uh, the strong economies of the West forced Japan to revalue the yen in the Plaza Accord. And because the yen was revalued upwards by almost 300%, then the cost of production in Japan was reduced, cost of production was increased, and Japan was less able to compete against in the world market. But that was only for a short time. After some time, the value system of the people was such that they worked very hard to produce goods that can compete with the Western suppliers in the world market. So it's the character of the people that determine whether the country should recover or should not recover. Now, if we can get a little bit of that in Malaysia through the Look East policy, maybe we too can emulate Japan and maybe also Korea and now China. These people work very hard. They are, I think, relatively more honest than some of us are. We have too many cases of dishonesty in this country. And because of all these bad values that we have, this is keeping us unable to grow as fast as we should. Actually, Malaysia is a very, very rich country. But even if it is rich and you do not know how to exploit the wealth, you will not become rich. I used to tell people that if you have under your house, in the ground, gold, but you have to dig it out before it has any value. But if you are not willing to dig or you ask somebody else to dig, it's the digger who becomes rich, not you. So Malaysia has got a lot of wealth, and today we are asking foreigners to come here and take the wealth from us because we are unwilling to dig.
Very liberating too, because you talk about Sony and Akio Morita and Japan being very close to you. And you also shared the roadblocks on the value system that we are currently facing as a result of quite an amount of hurdles that we are facing. So Tun, as no other leader has been blessed to come back and decide what should be reinvented and what should be retained. So how do you see your leadership role in reinventing this past legacy? that has not worked in your view, or has it worked halfway in your view? We are very interested to know your assessment on the status of this reinvention.
Well, I think, relatively speaking, we know what to do. And indeed, we were able to do something so as to make us at one time known as an Asian tiger. It shows that we know what to do. But today, we have much greater problem to face, bigger population, bigger problems. We inherited a government that was considered to be kleptocratic. So the problem requires greater effort and greater determination. You have to be passionate about uh, turning around the country. To a little extent, we have done quite well. Lots of people do not appreciate this. But if you look at many other countries, whenever there is a change of government, there is no acceptance. People take to the streets, they go on strike, they want to bring down the government. And they accuse the government of, cheating. But in Malaysia, the transition was very smooth. There were some problems, but we overcame that. And not only was the transition being smooth, but we find that generally the government that took over was able to function like a government. Less experience, yes, but it is accepted and it is able to plan and carry out many of the works that are necessary to turn around the country. We have overcome the problem of government machinery, of finance, of the new freedom in politics, etc. All these things have uh, not prevented Malaysia from being stable and is generally well governed. Of course, if you compare with some of the best countries, we are not so good. But today, there are not many countries which are better than Malaysia. Just look at what's happening in Latin America or even in North America, our good friend Mr. Trump, or even in England, Brexit, or even in Europe, or even in South Asia, or even in East Asia. You know, there is confrontation between neighbors in Northeast Asia. There is this problem of nuclear weapons, etc. But Malaysia is still stable. We are able to meet like this without any fear. Just imagine in some countries, when you meet like this, somebody comes in and starts to spray bullets among us. It's not happened here. God willing, it will never happen. But you know, even in New Zealand, even in Australia, people don't feel safe now. So at least this government has not failed in the sense of providing stability and security for this country. And with stability and security, the economy would certainly do well.
Thank you, Tun. I would like to take your quote in your answer just now, and I think we all should pat our own shoulder as well, because you said a little, to a little extent, we have done quite well. Shall we all pat our back on that as well? And when you actually compare it with other countries, I remember a friend who told us, you know, Noripah, Malaysia is much, much better than London, because in London, you have homeless people, and you don't have homeless people here in Malaysia. And you have beggars in London, there's no beggars here in Malaysia. So we have got to have that wake-up call to realize how lucky we are under your premiership. Just one last burning question, Tun. We don't have enough time. We have about 1 minute left. My burning question to you is a personal question. What would you be rather doing if you have not chosen to be a doctor as your original career and then politics? If life was to give you another 100 years, So here is your opportunity to reinvent a legacy, Tun.
I did not choose to be a doctor. I had no choice. In those days, if they give you a scholarship to study anything, you just say yes. You don't say no, or I prefer this or that. I wanted to be a lawyer, but well, I didn't get a scholarship to study law, so now I am a doctor. And believe me, I find that being a doctor provides many solutions to the problems of administration, because a doctor must always solve problem in order to give the correct treatment. And that kind of habit is still with me. Whenever I meet up with a problem, I regard it as a kind of sickness. I have to understand how it happens, why it happens, and what is the cause, and what is the probable solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting. We agree with the doctor story because in Bank Rakyat, we also have employed doctors. The master of ceremony there is Dr. Nazrul. He is in charge of head of sustainability. And we want to look at sustainability in a very clinical lens. Thank you, Tun, yang amat berhormat Tun. You actually gave us many insights today. But if I may, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to summarize three very important takeaways from these insights. Number one, Tun talked about the new Malaysia, which means institutionalizing reforms. Not just the GLCs and the GLICs, but it's also the corporate organizations and the public sector. From perspective of leadership, and you're talking about intelligent leadership. Number two, the governance and integrity of the country was compromised pre the GE14. And that needs quite an amount of work from governance, integrity, as well as governance, integrity, and transparency. So that means, Tun, you said we need to continue to reinvent for us to move forward and to be accepted internationally. And very passionately, you talk about the value system. Again, you use Japan and Sony and Akio Morita as example, the soya sauce again as an example. And there was a touch by Tun on power distance as well as collectivism in that whole Japanese story. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, can we put our hands together for our beloved Prime Minister, for having spent exactly 1 hour, Tun, satu saat tu, for having spent exactly 1 hour, his insight on what legacies that is in transition to retain or to reinvent. Thank you very much. A round of applause one more time to our beloved Prime Minister yang amat berhormat Tun Mahathir Mohamad.
Thank you, Yang Bahagia Datuk Noripah. Thank you, Yang Amat Berhormat Tun, for the very insightful session today. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, now to the moment we have been waiting for, the commitment of integrity pledge by the management of Bank Rakyat. With much respect, we invite Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri Muhammad Rizwan bin Muhammad Yusof, Minister of Entrepreneur Development, to join Yang Amat Berhormat Prime Minister and Yang Berbahagia Chairman on the stage to listen in to the pledge. Ladies and gentlemen, the commitment of integrity pledge by the management of Bank Rakyat will be led by the Acting Managing Director Yang Berbahagia Datuk Rosman Mohamad. And it will be witnessed by Yang Berbahagia Datuk Syamsun Baharin Muhammad Jamil, the Deputy Chief Commissioner of the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission, MACC. Yang Berbahagia Datuk Syamsun, if you can kindly take your place to witness the pledge. With that, we invite Yang Berbahagia Datuk Rosman to lead the management team of Bank Rakyat on the pledge.
Assalamualaikum Tun, Datuk Seri, Datuk. We hereby solemnly and sincerely pledge the following throughout our service with Bank Rakyat. We shall fully abide by the nation's law, rules, procedures, and policies on corruption prevention and abuse of power. We shall abhor and reject all forms of corruption and abuse of power, and shall give our full cooperation to the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission in preventing corruption and abuse of power. We shall not indulge in any form of corruption and abuse of power, either directly or indirectly, with any party dealing with Bank Rakyat. We shall ensure that our subordinates shall not indulge in any act of corruption and abuse of power in any dealing concerning Bank Rakyat. And we shall instantly report any form of corruption and abuse of power, either involving us or our subordinates, to the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission.
Round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you Yang Berbahagia Dato' and the management team of Bank Rakyat. Yang Amat Berhormat Tun, thank you so much for being with us today. We truly appreciate the support you and your government has given us. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we now come to the end of this ceremony, announcing the departure of Yang Amat Berhormat Tun Dr. Mahathir bin Mohamad, Prime Minister of Malaysia.